From EWTN News Nightly in Washington, D.C., I'm Tracy Sable with an EWTN News link. Former Cardinal Theodore McCarrick appeared in a Boston area courtroom this morning and pleaded not guilty to sexually assaulting a teenage boy nearly 50 years ago. The 91-year-old did not speak during the hearing. Days after Hurricane Ida battered Louisiana, President Joe Biden will visit the state today. The president will survey damage from the hurricane and plans on meeting with state and local leaders from the impacted communities. In New Zealand, 6 people were injured in a terrorist attack at a shopping center in Auckland. The country's prime minister says the attacker, who was believed to be an ISIS supporter and Sri Lankan national, was killed by police. I'm Tracy Sable with EWTN News Nightly. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and be sure to join us this evening on EWTN.
From the studios of EWTN, this is Open Line with today's host, Colin Donovan. In North America, call toll-free 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000 or send an email to openline@EWTN.com.
Well, welcome into EWTN's Open Line Friday. Our very own Vice President of Theology, Colin Donovan, is chomping at the bit, waiting, ready to answer your questions. If you'd like to be part of the program, the number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986.
Hello?
If you're outside the United States and Canada, we'd still love to hear from you. That number is 1-205-271-2985. And we'll even put you straight to the front of the line at 1-205-271-2985. You can always send us an email, openline@EWTN.com. Or you can text your question to Colin. Text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for a response. Text your first name and your question, message, and data rates may apply. I'm Jack Williams, Michael McCall producing the program, Michael Birchfield helping out with our social media efforts. So if you're watching us on YouTube or Facebook Live, you can type a question into the chat window and it may find its way to us by the end of the program. Your call screener is Matt Gubensky, and our host, as he is every single Friday, the pride of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Colin Donovan. How are you?
Oh, I'm good. I just like to make a technical note that I keep getting drops from the studio there. But other than that, I'm doing great.
Okay. Well, there you go. I think we hear you fine. That's all that matters. The dulcet tones of Colin Donovan are all that really matter for us. So, is there any truth to the fact that you were a former left wing for the Saskatoon Blades? Well, we may have lost Colin.
I hear you here.
There you are. There you are.
I don't know what's going on.
You're touching things again, Colin.
No, actually, I didn't do that until they started going out on me.
Well, I've got an email here from David, and he says, I understand that the church has declared the COVID-19 vaccines as illicit due to their remote connection to the evil of abortion. I accept this. However, it seems as though the church assumes the efficacy and safety of the vaccines in this judgment. What if the vaccines prove to be ineffective or even dangerous? Would that necessarily make them illicit? Our diocese requires its employees to get vaccinated against COVID-19, and I'm not sure what to do, because he is an employee, he says. Well, Colin may have missed the question there. Again, our number is 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're outside the United States and Canada, your number is 1-205-271-2985. That's 1-205-271-2985. And you can always text your question. Text the letters.
I really can't approve of that. Not that my approvals are really needed, but
God bless you, Karen. Thanks so much for holding on. That's a good question, and I'm sure a lot of people have run across things like that in their parishes out there, and that'll be helpful.
You know, I sympathize with pastors who are trying to get stuff done in the parish, and, you know, but a different route probably would have been better.
Yeah. Thanks so much. Again, it's a mailbag edition of EWTN's Open Line Friday, but we do have a couple callers that hung around from the last hour, and Alice is one of those. She's in the great state of Connecticut, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Alice, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Okay, thank you. My question concerns the end times. I've heard various things are meant to happen around then. At Jesus' second coming, he says, "Do you think I will find faith upon earth?" And there will be, the earthquakes and terrible floods and all that.
Sure.
But then I also hear about 1,000 years of peace. And then the Blessed Mother said, "In the end, my Immaculate Heart would triumph," which would seem to mean that there would be holiness on earth and peace. So I'm confused about what happens when.
Sure. First of all, unlike our non-Catholic Christian brothers and sisters, we don't think the end times as only the period of time at the very end. That's the ultissimi. That's the ultimate times, if you will. Really, since Christ's departure from the earth at the ascension, we are already in those times, because this is the last era of human history. And it'll have different phases. There's no doubt about that. The question is, how does that relate to the book of Revelation? The book of Revelation certainly contains prophetic information. It's an account of the contest between good and evil that takes place throughout all of history, going back to the fall of the angels in view of the incarnation. And so we have that beautiful chapter 12 regarding has Our Lady. Historically, some have said, well, that's Israel during the Old Covenant, that's Our Lady, the incarnation, that's the church during the New Covenant. But the idea is that the devil is out pursuing the brothers and the children of God, the brothers and sisters of our Lord, throughout history. And so the kinds of things that happen in there, the warnings to the seven churches, can be universalized to any period of time, but they may also then apply to discrete historical times as well. At least since the 3rd century in St. Augustine, and even in others before him, the symbolism of the 1,000 years, first of all, as a Jewish apocalyptic number, found in the idea of numbers in numerology, sacred numerology, existed before Book of Revelation. There's a whole intertestamental literature that employs it of Jewish origin. So that's already around. The 1,000 years is a long time. It's like the sacred number 7, referring to a fullness of things. Obviously, we associate 3 with the Trinity, 12 with the apostles, 10 with the Decalogue, the laws of God. So these numbers acquire significance based on that. 9 with the choir of angels, and so on. They obviously, in certain cases, they have a literal meaning, like the 10 commandments, the 12 apostles, but then they also have a figurative meaning. The 1,000 years since Augustine's time has been taken to be the time of the era of the church to the end of the world. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be other little hips and skips in history. So we can, first of all, for the general run of things, we can look to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, beginning at paragraph 668. So anybody listening, if you haven't looked at the Catechism in a while, go get it, look at 668, and it tells us the things that will occur before the end, including a falling away, the rise of what has always been called the Antichrist, following the example of St. John in his letters, and then the second coming after that. The mystics have elaborated on that. By that legitimate mystics would be saints and blesseds and venerables, have elaborated on that to see another crisis before the end of the world, which is sort of a preview and anticipation of that. And this is the one which most people who have thought thoughtfully about it have associated the Fatima with. Something along these lines, that there will be this great trial of the church, and out of this will come a period of time in which the Blessed Mother is teaching humility. You should read the calls of Fatima by Sister Lucia of Fatima, where she talks about essentially training an army in humility. It is by humility that Our Lady will conquer, not by armies. She illustrated that in the fall of the Soviet Union. Now we are reaping the fruits of the spread of the ideologies, the materialism, the atheism, which at one point had conquered Russia. We are now experiencing it in the West. And so we will have to have our purification as the Russian people did. And I think that's probably upon us right now. And after that, there will be some time, we don't know how long it will be, for us to complete the evangelization of the world, which has clearly not been completed when you look at the numbers of people around the world who, if they've heard the gospel, it's in a very perfunctory way.
Very special mailbag edition of EWTN's Open Line Friday. Our very own Vice President of Theology, Colin Donovan, is in the house. If you want to send us an email question we can answer in a future program, that address is openline@EWTN.com. Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan.
Coming up on EWTN News in Depth, how charities are helping thousands of Afghans adjust to life in America. Plus, a discussion about mental health through a Catholic lens, the growing relationship between the Catholic Church and mental health sciences. And as we head into Labor Day weekend, we look at the job opportunities the Felician Sisters of North America are providing for the people of Haiti. Join us for EWTN News in Depth this evening at 8 p.m. Eastern, exclusively on EWTN Radio and Television.
Father Benedict Groeschel.
I often go back to my childhood. In church, we love to be reverent to Christ present in the Eucharist, to Christ on the cross. But I was also impressed by our sisters who taught us in school to pray before every class, to pray for what we needed. Because we could be irreverent, we were taught to go to confession on Saturday and to ask ourselves, did we say our prayers well and without distraction? All this was reverence. Now what do I see? I hear one irreverence after another. And week after week, month after month, the media churns out things that make fun of religion in general and make fun of Christianity in particular, and particularly make fun of the Catholic Church. No class. Absolutely no class.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. If you have a question, call 1-833-288-EWTN. That's 1-833-288-3986. Outside North America, call 1-205-271-2985. Or send us an email to openline@EWTN.com.
Two brand spanking new books from EWTN Publishing for you this month. Mother Angelica's Guide to the Spiritual Life. From the nun who made her life's work to instruct millions, this volume assembles her most profound and timeless advice from her many books on how you can grow in holiness and achieve your ultimate purpose, to spend eternity in heaven with Jesus. And then Blue Collar Apologetics from John Martinoni, former host of EWTN's Open Line Monday. And he compiles in this book some great strategies for defending the Catholic faith using common sense, simple logic, and the sacred scriptures. You can get both these volumes at EWTN's religious catalog. Just log on to EWTNRC.com. We are back. Hopefully, our technical problems are behind us. For all of Colin's prowess in theology, he has just that little prowess when it comes to engineering, as it turns out. So hopefully we've rectified all of our problems, And we will now get to your phone calls. Without any further ado, Kathy is in Omaha, Nebraska. She is listening on Spirit Catholic Radio. Kathy, you are finally on with the one and only Colin Donovan.
Yay!
Let's hope we
Hi,
stay on, Kathy.
Yeah, I'll keep my fingers crossed. I have my husband, who's 73 years old, converted to the Catholic faith last year. He is very, very devoted to Mary, and he's been reading The Glories of Mary by St. Alphonsus de Liguori. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And he showed me something that absolutely threw me for a loop, talking about at the wedding of Cana, after Mary told Jesus that they were out of wine, and he, said, "What is this to me?" St. Alphonsus Liguori says, Mary, as if the Son had already granted her the favor, said to the attendants, "Fill the water pots with water. Come fill the water pots and you'll be consoled." And Jesus Christ, indeed to please his mother, changed that water into the best wine. I've never heard that before. In all the scriptures, Jesus tells them to fill the water pots.
Mm-hmm. I don't know where he would have gotten that from. I mean, the idea, I think, is quite clear from a theological point of view. Christ was not limited in his knowledge of when his ministry was to begin and where it was to end. He was the Son of God. At no point was he not divine. He didn't always tell us everything that he knew, obviously, such as when he was asked about the end of the world, he said only the Father knows. That's taken as his, not his right, not his, as he who comes from the Father as his word is, the Father will determine when that will be announced to the world. And then this is a case where his knowledge of when his ministry would begin is one thing, and Mary's operating with the usual human knowledge, but with the love of a mother and the concern of a woman for the wedding couple and their guests, made this request, I think, in all simplicity, knowing that her son would respond to it. As for the detail there of who did what, that may be from the mystics. I'm not exactly sure where Alphonsus is drawing that from, but I think the end result is the one that is important. Mary's intercessory role being illustrated there, the difference between the human and the divine knowledge, and yet God respects our limited human decisions done with good faith and prudently. And so this is also a factor that we can take into account in our own lives. We're not always told by God what it is we are to do. We must muddle through the prudential elements of it and decide whether it's our vocation or a job change or any change in our life. And so I think it is a great lesson in the humanity of Our Lady versus the divinity of our Lord, and yet God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit respected this intervention and acted upon it. I think that's a marvelous lesson, not just regarding Mary's dignity, but also our own, the respect that God gives for us in our limitedness as human beings, not being able to see the future, not being able, to know the outcome of every decision.
Is that helpful, Kathy?
Yeah, it just kind of threw me for a loop. And maybe when we get to heaven, we can ask St. Alphonsus what he was thinking.
Well, that's true. And, or if somebody has encountered it in some author, that might be an interesting discovery as well.
Thanks, Kathy. We appreciate the phone call. That frees up a line for you at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. A couple of open phone lines and plenty of time for your calls here on Open Line Friday. Next up is Marcia in Colorado Springs, Colorado, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Marcia, you're on with Colin Donovan.
Hi, thank you. I've been wondering about something a lot here lately. And if both the ordinary and the extraordinary masses are valid, with valid sacraments, then I wondered why it causes disunity to prefer the Latin Mass over the Novus Ordo or the other way around. And would preferring the Eastern Rite liturgies also create disunity? And I ask this because it sounds to me like in order to have unity, only one liturgy, like the Novus Ordo, could be used in the entire Catholic Church.
No, that's not the reasoning or the logic behind it. In fact, each of the rites developed organically in the part of the world where the apostles went. And so we have the interesting rites in India, for example, the Syro-Malankar and Syro-Malabar. We have Chaldean rites for the area of Iraq and Syria, and that we have the Byzantine rites, where the gospel was brought to the first from Byzantium, Constantinople, then on to the countries, the Slavic countries, for example. And so they were incarnated, if you will, in those cultures, because the purpose of the liturgy is to communicate something divine that is real through by means of signs. In the case of the sacraments and the justice and the grace that is given in baptism, or the strengthening of the Holy Spirit in confirmation, or the confection of the Eucharistic, of the sacrifice and the body and blood of Christ in the Eucharist, and so on. And so the essential elements of all the sacraments and all the rites are the same, whereas the clothing, if you will, the dress that is used, has been culturally in a cultural incarnation of those things. And so this is when you hear the expression inculturation, it's how the gospel becomes planted in a particular culture in a particular time in history. So in that context, we can speak, for example, of the Roman Rite versus the various rites in the various churches. And there are more churches, there are churches which use the same rite, but they represent a same, say, Slavic culture, for example. In the case of the Roman Rite, we had quite a variety of rites before the Council of Trent. There was a main Roman line, which was that used in the city of Rome. There was the Ambrosian Rite being used in Milan from the time of St. Ambrose. There was the Mozarabic Rite in Spain, the Bragan Rite in Portugal. There was a Gallic liturgy. There was an English liturgy, the Sarum. And so these all existed with their differences and distinctions, more or less on the pattern of the Western rites, say different from the more ceremonial and all of the things we associate with the Eastern liturgies. In that respect, perhaps simpler and a slightly different approach to the sacramental rites. And then at the Council of Trent, Rome brought those all together and made it the rule for all of the countries, unless there was a rite of venerable age, 300 years of age. And there are many smaller rites within the church, all part of the Roman Rite. So it's because they're following a tradition, and they were allowed to do that. When the council, following 150 years of liturgical investigation and theology, was trying to make the Mass of the Roman Rite into something that might be less foreign, because if you think about the ethos of the Middle Ages is quite different than the modern ethos. That was their intention. It was very much a pastoral intention. They were trying to do that this was the product of that was the rite, which is the most common one around the world. But yet it was recognized that older priests, for example, after the council, priests of a certain age were continued to celebrate the older rite, the pre-Vatican II rite, and then it became primarily the practice of certain groups which were out of communion with Rome, such the Pius X Society and so on, and other groups. There's not the only one. So what John Paul II tried to do, first of all, with Ecclesia Dei, which was a commission he set up, a document that he issued and a commission he set up, was to keep all those people in the church, to keep them close to the church, even though the rite was not the same. It was nonetheless, the essential elements are the same, and even many of the forms are the same. It's in the vernacular as opposed to the Latin. But if you take the first Eucharistic prayer, that it has a continuity with all of that history, the prefaces that are used, the collects, and many of the other things. New ones were written as well, and the calendar of saints had changed, and new saints added, and new prayers and things written for those. But all of this under the control of the Holy See, where it should be. But the popes wanted to keep those who had a desire for this rite in the church rather than in a schismatic situation. And so there was this opening, and also came with it a flowering of interest in the practice of this. What I think, whether you agree with his argumentation or not, Pope Francis was trying to do after consultation with the bishops was not say it's illegitimate to use this valid rite. But as a general matter, Catholics in the Roman Rite should have the same liturgy throughout the church as a principle of unity of that. And he wasn't restricting it, as he makes clear in the letter that he issued to the bishops, to those who are legitimately attracted to it, but to those who have a schismatic mind and would condemn the new rite in some manner.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number, 833-288-3986. It's Open Line Friday with Colin Donovan.
Marktail an Ernia, Marktail an Catholics.
Sindiniki, Katolikkuniki.
Vivamos la verdad. Vivamos católicos.
In any language, it means the same. Live truth. Live Catholic. EWTN.
This is Life Issues with Brad Mattis, president of Life Issues Institute.
Each year, pro-lifers observe the National Day of Remembrance for Aborted Children. Across the nation, there are memorials and grave sites to memorialize the over 62 million babies who have been sacrificed on the altar of pro-choice. September 18 marks this year's observance. I encourage you to take part if you can. A website will direct you to the nearest memorial or grave site to attend a memorial service. If there isn't an event near you, please consider planning one. These events provide closure for parents of aborted babies and peace to all who participate. For more information, please visit our website at lifeissues.org and click on the microphone icon. We've provided links to all the information you'll need to help memorialize the many victims of abortion.
Like us on Facebook at Life Issues and stay informed, more informed than you've ever been.
Smart speakers help with a lot these days. Did you know you can use your smart speaker to hear the top stories of the day from a Catholic perspective?
On Google Home, all you have to do is walk up to your speaker and say, "Hey Google, play Catholic News."
Here's the latest news.
Welcome to your daily Catholic news briefing.
For more information on how to get the latest Catholic news on your smart speaker or wherever you get your podcasts, go to catholicnewsagency.com/smart speakers.
Monday on More to Life, labels.
Feeling trapped by the labels that you or others are sticking on you? We'll help set you free.
That's Monday on More to Life. Now back to Open Line with Colin Donovan.
This is Open Line on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. We've still got time for your phone calls at 833-288-3986. And Colin, you were putting a bow on the question about the unity within the liturgies.
Right, and I think there are a lot of viewpoints and opinions regarding the complete legitimacy of the arguments the Pope and others are making in this regard. The bishops who, for example, have totally clamped down on it since they were given permission. It seems like there are those, and others who haven't. And that is that the unity of the church is not at all disrupted by diversity, whether it's the Eastern rites or the presence of the traditional rite within the church. That's not the claim. I think the claim which the Pope and the bishops are making, that wish to be able to control this locally, is seeing the groups in their diocese and the individuals who are attracted to it, and distinguishing between those who, as his own document said, have this attitude of, and you encounter it not all that frequently. I think it's a relatively small number of people, which is, I think, an unfortunate element of this whole thing. That idea that somehow, okay, the Novus Ordo is to be, if not invalid, but a lesser thing than the traditional rite, rather than simply a different approach, an updated, if you will, not a popular expression with regard to the Mass, however. And in that context, it's sort of like what the other position of the other side, that people are trapped in the past versus people who are doing something that they should just adopt the past, adopt the old liturgy. I think what the Pope and what the Church and what the Council would say, and what Aquinas and many others throughout the history of the Church would say, and that is, the thing that holds us together is our faith in the validity of the sacraments, which is confirmed by one authority, and that is the supreme magisterium, whether it's exercised by the Pope alone or by the Pope in union with all of the bishops. We can go nowhere else for a valid liturgy than to the Church. Incidentally, yes, you can have groups that have broken away from us that have maintained apostolic succession and so on, but that's not the will of Christ. The unity is the will of Christ, and I think the Pope, whether it was the most prudent way or the best way to go about doing it, is trying to protect the unity and also supply pastorally for those who still want the traditional liturgy. And so maybe in the end you can't have both of those things, but I think it's the fact that in the last decade or so, this other voice has gotten louder regarding the Novus Ordo, regarding the Church today, regardless of who you want to blame for that. Nonetheless, we're all united by faith, the supernatural virtue. We're not united by which form of the Mass we go to, whether we go to the Syro-Malabar or whether we go to the Ruthenian or whether we go to the Ukrainian or whether we go to the Roman or the Ambrosian. Those things are expressions of our unity. It's our faith and all of the doctrine that has that unites us. The details are important. The incarnations of the gospel and of truth in our different cultures, in our different rites, that's important as well. But it's our faith in what Christ did in establishing the Church and whom he put in charge of the Church when all else fails, whether under persecution or other factors of history. When all else fails, it is still the faith that unites us in the Church that Christ gave us. And once we start making all these other things more important than they are, they're not unimportant, but in the hierarchy of values, faith, hope, and charity are far more important than any of these details of how anyone at any time in history has celebrated a valid liturgy. And we have to remember that. And I think this is an opportunity to think about that and to realize that liturgy is beautiful. Well-celebrated Roman Ordo, Novus Ordo liturgies, such as you see the papal liturgies, or you see here from our own chapel at EWTN. Those are beautiful. Those are expressions of that faith, but it's the faith and all that it doctrinally means to us that is the more important thing. And we have to keep that front and center, not get distracted by all this other stuff, as important and significant as it is in each of its, each of the questions that are raised about governance or prudential practices or norms or whatever. That's not the central thing.
833-288-EWTN. Couple of open phone lines for you at 833-288-3986. Next up is Ida, a first-time caller in Perdido Beach, Alabama, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Ida, you are on with Colin Donovan.
Hi. I was meditating on Mary's Canticle the other night, and you know where it says, my soul proclaims the greatness of the Lord. My spirit rejoices in God, my Savior. Is there a difference between the soul and the spirit? And if so, what is it?
Yeah, I think in that context, not these are synonyms. The human spirit is called a soul. The angelic spirit is simply the angel itself. We can't distinguish in an angel the angelic spirit from the angelic person. In human beings, we do, because we can say the spiritual dimension of man is the soul, and then the physical dimension is the body. So these are synonyms there. They can, and sometimes you see this even in the biblical literature, body, soul, and spirit to refer to the grace of God acting in the person. I think this is not a case of that, but rather these are simply, if you're speaking poetically, as she is obviously moved to do in that context, this is a synonym, and it, in that respect, it is another way of saying that part of man which is of God and the image of God. So I think that's what's going on in that text.
Is that helpful for you?
Thank you so much. Yes, it is.
Thank you,
That's
Ida.
great.
We appreciate the phone call. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. It's a free phone call anywhere in North America. 833-288-3986. Matthew's watching us on YouTube, and he wants to know, how does a catechumen observe First Friday and First Saturday devotions?
Well, they can't, because a catechumen is not able to receive Holy Communion. But obviously, if you think about what those devotions are about, First Friday is about honoring the Sacred Heart of Jesus, which is the heart being the representation of a human love. Here, a case of human love and divine love combined in the same heart. And on First Saturday, the Immaculate Heart of Mary, the special privilege of Our Lady as being the first of our species, of our race, to be fully recreated through the grace of Christ, received at her conception. So I think that's the way we can understand it, that a person who is not yet able to receive Holy Communion and to honor the Lord in those ways can certainly look forward with great joy and zeal towards the day when they can. But there are prayers and devotions to the Sacred Heart. They can go to Mass, and they can receive a spiritual communion. It's not identical, but it's not grace-free either. The Lord will be pleased with that, and so I would certainly recommend that to catechumens to participate. In some places, they will have Sacred Heart devotions. Obviously, First Saturday devotions are widespread in the church due to the message of Fatima. Participate in every way that is lawful to you as a catechumen, and look forward with great love and hope towards the day when you can fully participate.
833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. It's a free phone call anywhere in North America. 833-288-3986. Hunter is in Saginaw, Michigan, listening on Ave Maria Radio. Hunter, you are on with Colin Donovan.
Hi, Colin. Thanks for taking the call. And I know you're probably sick of these because it's been you guys talk about it a lot. But I just started attending the traditional mass in the past half year, really. And I totally agree when you say that it's something that traditionalists should not be saying, that Novus Ordo is illicit or illegitimate or something of that sort. But I think a lot of times traditionalists will make the case that there's simply more to the worship, and simply from a matter of sacramentals, saying the Non Sum Dingus 3 times instead of once, having 2 gospels instead of 1, things of that sort. And I think sometimes when traditionalists vocalize that, it comes across when they're trying to say there's more to the worship, it comes across as the Novus Ordo is lesser in legitimacy or something like that. So at the very least, is it fair to say that these two we don't have to hold them in equal esteem as far as equally reverent? It's okay to view one as more reverent or having more to it, and that's a fair criticism, I guess, or is that something we should avoid?
Yeah, I think the difficulty is that it misunderstands that the Mass has a certain, almost magical quality to it. Because let's say you go to a traditional Mass, and you are exalted by the music, by the dignity and the mystery that it evokes, and so on. Many people say rightly that they feel, they're almost in the anteroom of heaven or something like that. All of that is good, but it can mistake that feeling for piety. On the other hand, I can attest with absolute certainty that I have probably been to thousands of abusive masses over the course of my adult life, and somehow it hasn't been a hindrance in me growing in my spiritual life and getting closer to our Lord and getting me to where I am, for example, in God's providence here at EWTN. This is because when the church distinguished the effects or the realities associated with the sacraments, there is that which comes by way of the institution of Christ and the using the valid form and matter of the minister, even if it's a lay person baptizing in an emergency and so on and so forth. That is what's in Latin, the ex opere operato, by the deed done. And we can know with absolutely certainty that baptism effects what it tells us it does, that confirmation effects what it tells us it does in the words the church gives it. The Eucharist, that absolution, I absolve you, absolutely effects what Christ intended, and so on down the line. To that, we bring our own devotion. And devotion is a big part of it. And this is maybe where, there's some fair criticism. And I think the criticism is not of a Novus Ordo rightly celebrated with dignity and holiness and so on, but of the abuse of liturgies and so on. But even those are not obstacles neither to our sanctification through the sacrament and our growth in it, or ultimately our piety. Because if we say it is, we end up in the wrong notion that somehow somebody else can communicate to me devotion. They can make it, yes, they can fertilize the ground, if you will, and make it. But ultimately, it's we, by our attention, by our desire for God, by our openness to God, that the effects of what is absolutely certain in a valid sacrament is able to effect anything in us at all. So while the Mass of a Padre Pio may be very, you would think that his prayers alone would have great consequence in people's hearts and in his ministry, and they don't did. But the Mass of a Padre Pio, or the Mass of a Pope, or the Mass of the first Mass of a newly ordained priest, absolutely equal in terms of their power and effect, as would be what the person brings to it. Now, this is where I think it would be lovely to see the same zeal applied to the correcting of those whose ideas regarding the traditional Mass are on the borders or on the edges of what is legitimate. To see a similar correction of those who give the faithful an anemic liturgy, which, although it has all of the properties of a valid liturgy and is able to make saints out of the people who go to it, it doesn't really encourage them. It certainly doesn't encourage them to be loyal and faithful to the church and obedient to the church's norms and laws. And obedience is the beginning sign of love, as Christ said. If you love me, keep my commandments. If you love my church, you could say, keep my commandments. So yes, let's get rid of the abusive liturgies with the same zeal that we wish to corral people who might, in some cases, be capable of thinking, well, this church that has the Novus Ordo is not Christ's church. Well, if you depart from it, you're not in Christ's church. It's as simple as that. So I think, yes, there's a lot of blame to go around, but I think it's a mistaken idea to suggest that one rite is a better another, or even one devoutly celebrated Novus Ordo Mass is not the equal of a devoutly celebrated traditional Latin Mass. Because for the individual, it's going to ultimately be what we bring to it.
The sacrifice doesn't change.
It does. Nothing changes, and the individual, all 1.5 billion Catholics, you have 1.5 billion results, because we ultimately determine its effect on us, and that's something we need to work on too.
Does that make sense, Hunter?
It does, absolutely. I also just, as you kind of mentioned there, I never believed that Christ was present in the Eucharist growing up in the Novus Ordo, and that belief in the sacraments and in that power of it did come through attending the Latin Mass later. And I know I'm not unique in that case. I know.
Yeah, but you do realize that belief is a gift. So, granted, you could say that psychologically it didn't strike you in the same way, and that's probably a legitimate criticism to make. But everything was there, and I think, what was the pastor teaching? What were the catechists teaching? What were the nuns teaching? What were your parents teaching? What was, if you went to a Catholic school, what were you hearing? To reduce it to the failure of the Novus Ordo, my own experience, that's nonsense.
Thanks, Hunter. We appreciate the phone call. 833-288-EWTN is our toll-free number. It's a free phone call anywhere in North America. 833-288-3986. And I think those points are well taken, Colin, as someone who regularly attends the Extraordinary Form Mass. I've been to, we are so blessed here in Birmingham. I mean, we have beautiful Extraordinary Form Masses. We have beautiful Novus Ordo Masses that are available to us. Probably the most powerful experience at a celebration of the Eucharist that I've ever experienced was at a Novus Ordo Mass at the Basilica of the Shrine of in Washington for, leading up to, on the eve of the March for Life one year, about a decade ago. It was snowing, and there were about 250 people in the vestibule that couldn't fit into the church in a soup and slop of snow. And at the moment of consecration, every knee in that vestibule hit the ground, in spite of the sloppy, snowy mess of it. And I've also been to some Extraordinary Form low masses that were rifled through in pretty irreverent fashion. So, the door swings both ways in both accounts, I think.
Yeah, and I think that has to be recognized, and it doesn't depreciate at all the desire, I think, of people who wish to go to the traditional Latin Mass. I think, if anything else, as I tried to make clear, I think the bishops, to be pastoral, must correct all abuses of ideas of what's significant. Say, if they find that there are people in their diocese who have schismatic ideas at work, or are denigrating the church or the bishop or the pope, that's incompatible with the traditional Latin Mass. You can't think of St. Thomas or St. Dominic or any of the great saints ever having done that in their lifetime, and you can't reconcile with the Catholic faith, no matter how many expressions of a beautiful liturgy you have. You have. So I think that we are at a moment in history where we can make choices to give the people of the church, bishops and priests, can good liturgies of whatever kind they are authorized to celebrate, and also good doctrine and good example. We've had a lot of trouble in all of those areas in my lifetime as well in the last, I won't give you a number, but it's pretty high.
Be sure to check out EWTN's Pro-Life Weekly Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Eastern Time. Join Catherine Hadro for all the latest comings and goings of the pro-life movement. That's EWTN's Pro-Life Weekly Sunday morning, 10 a.m. Eastern Time on EWTN television and radio. David says, I understand the church has declared the COVID-19 vaccines as illicit due to their remote connection to the evil of abortion. I accept this. However, it seems as though the church assumes the efficacy and safety of the vaccines in this judgment. What if the vaccines prove to be ineffective or even dangerous? Would that necessarily make them illicit?
Well, you have to imagine that's a spectrum. And the church doesn't suggest that it can give you the medical scientific answer to the question. What she says is this: no individual other than yourself. We talked about 1.5 billion Catholics. We can talk about 7 billion people living on the planet. There are 7 billion people who have the right to decide whether a risk is tolerable for them. You get in your car on a snowy day because you have to get, I don't know, maybe you're taking your wife to the hospital to have a baby or something like that. You're doing what you think is necessary. You assume a risk. You assume a risk every time you get in your car every day. So the only question the church is answering is it legal is it morally all right to get in a car? In this case, is it morally all right to have a vaccination to save your health? Now, you have to do the due diligence to know about the different medical procedures you're offered, whether it's a vaccination or a surgery or a new therapy or a new medicine that's been proposed to, solve your particular health issue. You have to do the due diligence. You should question the doctor in all such cases. Find out everything you can. But in the end, the decision is yours. So the church is saying in the vaccines that on the moral grounds alone, there is a remote causal connection to the abortions in the 80s or 60s. I think there are a couple cases here, from which these fetal lines were then cloned and then multiplied over multiple generations of them. That there is a causal connection because the scientists who did that, who perpetuate those lines, the companies that test their vaccines or medicines on those lines, they didn't do the abortion. They're not saying that they approve of the abortion. And you're not saying you're approving of the abortion because you take a vaccine to save your life, any more than you're saying that, well, you approve of, you buy a shirt at the big box store, and maybe it was, put together in some third world country. Are you assured that there wasn't slave labor or something? You simply can't know the facts in that case. In this case, the causal connection is similar. Way down the line, there may be some wrongdoing done, in this case, abortion. Now, the difference with abortion and the clothing or anything of that instance is that the church's moral tradition on these issues says that in the case where a human life is at the root of the moral concern, as in the case of abortion, you may not be a material cooperator. It's not desirable to be a remote cooperator in any way, even if it's very remote. And the church is clear on that with the vaccines, that these are not desirable choices to make, the using of these vaccines, except when there is no other choice and the alternative is your life or the life of your family members or whatever. That's what makes it morally okay by standard moral theology. This is boilerplate moral theology. The Pope didn't invent it. The bishops conference didn't invent it. Nobody invented this. It's been thought out, worked out over decades, and applied in this particular case that there's a legitimate proportionality and it's okay. Whether it's medically risky to you, that's a judgment you're going to have to make in consultation with your doctors. And that's not something the church is ever going to come up with a laundry list of procedures, with some of which are medically risky and some of which are not. That's not her job, and she doesn't try to do it.
Colin, have a great weekend.
You too, Jack.
On behalf of our host, Colin Donovan, our producer, Michael McCall, our call screener, Matt Kubensky, I'm Jack Williams. Thanks so much for tuning in another great week of EWTN's Open Line. Back at it on Monday with a brand new Labor Day edition of Open Line with Father John Trigilio, and we'll be back again on Tuesday with Father Wade Menezes, Father Mitch on Wednesday, Father Brian Milady on Thursday, and Colin will round it all out again next Friday. Until we get together on Monday, God bless.